Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with the Scarab God Blue-Black Zombie Kindred. This deck comes from Corey, who says, I would like your honest opinion of the deck, and I'm more than open to suggestions. I know Scarab God is a huge target, so my goal for the deck is for the deck to hold its own even if the Scarab God is removed from play. I'm having a hard time removing cards to make room for some better ones, so if you see any that catch your eye, that would be appreciated. And the only restriction is the budget should be under $600. We will definitely work within that budget, and absolutely, I am here to help you remove cards when you cannot. I will be ruthless for sure, as, you know, when we build our own decks, we get attached to some of our darlings, and it can be tough to find exactly where to make the cuts. I will suggest the cuts. You get to make the cuts if you like my suggestions. But before we go any further, let's find out who our commander is and go on from there. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is the Scarab God and why are they our blue-black Zombie Kindred deck commander? Well, they're a 5-mana god, 5/5 in blue and black, and they have 3 abilities. The first ability is beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. A pretty strong ability, but one that takes a little bit of time for it to get going, and it's generally telegraphed. If you have a board of 6 to 8 zombies, right, your opponents have a whole turn cycle usually to get rid of this Scarab God, and so when you can win, like when you have so much advantage with that first ability, you tend to lose the Scarab God. The second ability is for 2 blue-black. You exile a creature card from a graveyard, and then you create a 4/4 eternalized copy of it. Now, this one's really interesting. I really like that it hits all of your opponents' graveyards and not just your own, and it makes zombies. Scarab God, of course, is not a zombie itself, and so it's really cool that this is how it makes the Kindred, synergy happen. And then finally, an ability that's held by that god cycle of the Scarab God, the Locust God, and the Scorpion God is that when this creature dies, you return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Therefore, in a way, you never quite need to pay for the commander tax unless the Scarab God gets exiled or shuffled into the deck or moved to a zone. Not entirely sure which zone that would be out of the other two, but a nice little safety net. So, something I think that's worth noting about the Scarab God, I kind of talked about the first ability and how it's almost a liability for the Scarab God. Now, don't get me wrong, making your opponents waste removal, or maybe not waste, but burn through their removal in order to keep you from gaining this life advantage, with the scry being somewhat useful as well. It's that second ability that I think is really strong. And for me, I generally, when I think of the Scarab God, if I'm building it outside of Kindred, which is not what we're doing here, I want to build it in like a ramp almost shell, where I want to hit, I need to hit 9 mana, or I need to reduce the ability with like Training Grounds and then hit 7 mana, because I want to cast this card and I want to immediately use this ability. This ability has a very high ceiling, especially if you've been playing control or your opponents have been kind of taking out their own creatures, because generally you want to steal some creatures from your opponents. I'm thinking cards like Esper Sentinels, I'm thinking cards like, nothing else is coming to mind, Oppression Agents, Dark Confidants, you can't take commanders, but like really strong ramp pieces, lots of stuff. I'm sorry, I'm hitting a blank here, but our kind of collection of creatures, we don't tend to want to rebuy, because a lot of them we can already rebuy from, zombie synergies, but otherwise, it's better spent on non-blue-black creatures. So going into the deck itself, before we go into our darlings, I want to talk, actually let's start with the basics of the land and the curve, and then we'll talk about reliance on commander. So we have 35 lands. We have a curve that I really like the curve, but the lands do feel kind of low. We have a 5-mana commander. Our ramp isn't bad, but it also isn't really ideal. Hedron Archive, for example, is a hard card to ramp into when we have so few lands, whereas the other ones are generally, 2 mana ramp. That gets us just a little further in the game. And Mox Tantalite is a very slow ramp card, as you can't even cast it by itself. This is a card I'm probably going to suggest we cut. But before we get to that, just feeling that, especially when we have like Cabal Coffers, which sometimes in our hand rots as not a land when we don't have Urborg, I really wouldn't mind going up 2 more lands. I am actually going to suggest a land in my additions, but beyond that, I think there's a lot of really nice choices we could put here. The one that comes to mind that's always fun is the, just one of those blue-black lands, River of Tears. The one that specifically says that if you have played a land, it taps for black. If you haven't played a land this turn, it taps for blue. I just really like that land. It used to be like expensive and bad, but now it's been reprinted a bunch, and it just came to mind as a free one you could put in here. But going into the deck itself, before we cut darlings, what I want to talk about is this idea of let's make this deck less reliant on the Scarab God. Let's treat it as if it's a zombie Kindred deck first, and then a Scarab God deck second. And I think this is really reasonable. Like, this is a really good way of thinking it, and I appreciate that Corey thought of this. Because something I think about is, in a lot of Kindred decks, I don't want to be too reliant on the commander. So what I do, especially like in this scenario, where the Scarab God has a lot of very hyper-specific combos or interactions with the Scarab God that don't apply to, let's say, Wilhelt, who is another, like, I believe the most popular blue-black zombie commander. So what I do in order to get ideas to power up the main and not worry too much about the commander is I will actually just go to Wilhelt's, EDH Rec website, and I will look at a zombie list that doesn't have the Scarab God in it, or, what are the recommendations when the Scarab God is not your commander? And I'll use that for inspiration or ideas primarily, and then, think about cards that work with the Scarab God. I find that to be really helpful. This is something, just as a moment talking about EDH Rec. EDH Rec is a helpful tool, but also kind of dangerous. Like, well, maybe not dangerous, but kind of not the best tool. See, it amalgamates data, and therefore it tends to skew the meta towards itself and reinforce what is seen as normal for these decks to run, right? Like, for example, someone sees that Zombie Master is played a lot in blue-black zombie lists, so they start playing it and uploading their deck lists, and those deck lists do well, and then they get put back into EDH Rec, who says, yes, Zombie Master is good, let's push that further, and Zombie Master isn't that good, right? Something just to consider. So I use EDH Rec a lot for inspiration, and a way to kind of bend it so it works is to not specifically look at your commanders. I think that was Discord. I am going to mute that on this side. It's not to specifically look at it, just for your commander, but to look at the, you look at the Kindred, you look at zombie decks in general, you look at other zombie decks in that color, and you look at other similar kind of decks in those colors as well. Look for blue-black aggro decks, look for blue-black mid-range decks, right? And you'll get a bigger and a wider kind of assortment of ideas. This is especially important for cards like Wilhelt, who are commander precons, because I don't know if you know this, I love people, but people will just upload the entirety of the precon list to a website and submit it somewhere. I don't know why they do this. I recognize it's nice to have the original list for someone to go look, but Wizards of the Coast already has that on their website, I believe. So these just like precon lists or precons with like 10 changes lists just dilute the card pool or deck pool that EDH Rec pulls out of as well, and it just gets worse and worse. That's my opinion. I really there's only so much you can do in this kind of deck. So all that aside, let's kill some darlings. Let's look around and see what we can do and be a little harsh. So generally, when I'm looking at a deck like this, a few things I want to look at is cards that don't do anything immediately. So let's look at Lich Lord of Unks, one of my favorite liches when I first started Magic, and not a good card. Lich Lord of Unks generates black-blue zombie wizards 1 turn after it comes in. And then, at any point when you have the mana, you can make, for blue-blue, black-black, target player loses X life, mills X cards, where X is the number of zombies you control. Definitely the more powerful ability. Now, I understand how powerful that feels, but I'm going to ask you this. If I said I had a 7 mana sorcery spell that was basically this ability, right? And maybe let's say +1 because it counts Lich Lord, would you put that in your deck? Because I think reasonably what would happen, and the only way to use this card, is to slam it down for 3, immediately activate its ability, and then probably it's going to die. The idea of having 11 mana to do it twice in a turn is ambitious, let's say, and with such a specific mana cost of 1, 3 blue, 2 black, like, it's going to be, actually 3 blue, 3 black, sorry. It's just going to be really, really hard to get this multiple times. And even then, when we compare it to our commander, who does it across the table, we'll note that the Lich Lord only hits 1 player. And though the mill is nice, we're going to get back to this milling aspect a little later. I don't think it's as good as it feels. So for me, easy cut. Poppet Stitcher is another one. This, once again, feels interesting. It is a 2/3 that as you cast instants or sorceries, you create zombie tokens. And then on the other side, it makes all your creature tokens 3/3. In technicality, that makes your zombies 1, like give them +1/+1. And I think that's it, because mainly I don't think we're really playing any meaningful zombies. It does work better with the zombie army you create, because it basically gives it +3/+3, but that's all it does. And so for zombies, especially in Zombie Kindred, this is the akin of it saying, you know, this is good with the decayed zombies, but otherwise it's basically saying your zombies get +1/+1 if they are tokens. And I don't really think that's good. I don't think you're gonna play this. With, let's see, 17 instants and sorceries, this just doesn't really belong in the deck. I don't think it's going to do a lot. It itself is not a wizard. It's not a zombie. You have to wait until your upkeep and then have at least 3 creature tokens to flip this. And it's $5. Part of some of these cards I'm going to hit is for budget reasons, like budget versus their power. And this is a card that's too expensive for what it does. If we are trying to make this deck more reliant and stronger without our commander, this doesn't even work with our commander. It's just not a particularly strong thing. Actually, I didn't even think of that. With our commander, our 4/4s become 3/3s. The 4/4s our commander generates. So this is just a straight up nombo with your commander. I think overall you'll get a power boost rather than a power reduction if you count all your tokens. But it is notable that it makes your commander's eternalized creatures weaker. So that's fine. Going a bit further, I did mention Zombie Master. I don't really like this card. I don't really like these lords in general. They all feel a little cute. I'm of the belief that lords are the weakest part of any Kindred deck because they give such a generic ability that matters so little until you have 10 to 20 of that creature type in play. And those zombies do have the means to summon quite a bit of creatures. I still think it rates rather poorly. Like Cemetery Reaper just has this bonus. Then how often are you activating this ability? How often do you have the extra mana to do this? So for me, these aren't the harshest cuts. I'm okay if you keep them. You can keep definitely Cemetery Reaper. You can keep Lord of the Undead. You can keep even Diagraph Captain and Death Baron. But definitely Zombie Master needs to go. The Swamp Walk, even with Urborg, is too cute. The fact that you can regenerate some zombies is really not going to come up. I think this is a very, very easy cut. Now, as we get higher, we're going to have bigger cuts and maybe harsher cuts. Cleaver Cleaver's Scab is a good card. I'm not going to cut it, but I think it's close if you were making this really, really powerful. Once again, the lack of haste is kind of a big problem, but I will say the ceiling is rather, rather good. Gisa and Geralf is also somewhat cute. We're hitting 4 mana, and all this reliably does is mill 4, and then you need a few extra points of mana to do anything with it. One of the 2 1-mana cards you have, which is the most reliable thing to reanimate, is Gravecrawler. And Gravecrawler doesn't need Gisa and Geralf to work that way. Gisa and Geralf, I just really think, like, there are a few hits, but they're few and far between, and I would rather this be something else. There's also, once again, a bit of a nombo. Like, we do want it to work separately from the deck, but the fact that you're casting them, like, if you get the Scarab God going, you're exiling your creatures, where Gisa and Geralf, need them to stay in the graveyard. Maybe that's being too picky. Maybe I'm gonna let that go. Graveborn Muse, once again, this is a little close. It's on upkeep. This is such a high ceiling. I think I'm fine with it. It sucks to have this bolted, but being able to at least, even if Graveborn Muse is your only zombie to draw a card, I think it's fine. The life loss will add up, and there are points that this card may kill you, but that's why we play black, right? That's the whole idea. So I think that's fine. Species Specialist feels like a better version, honestly, of Graveborn Muse, and if you were to cut one, I would cut the Muse and keep the Species Specialist, as you have some more control over this, and you don't have to lose the life. Just worth saying. Going forward, Twilight Profit, we're definitely at the point that we're going too far in this 4-mana draw card kind of idea. We're not even in zombies anymore, and this card doesn't do anything until you have 10 permanents. This is definitely a cut, very, very easily. Though I really do like Twilight Profit. It is a card I've always enjoyed. This is not the deck for it, and I think it's easy to toss out. Speaking of killing your darlings, oh, Undead Alchemist, I love you so, but you need to go. This is a card that is honestly a liability more than anything else. I get it. I get the dream. I love the dream. I have this card. I love this card. The idea of one card propagating an entire army of creatures is so, so cool. But that word instead is a nightmare. If this was retemplated, or like a new version of this card was made a la Toxic, where it did the alternate win con and the damage, even half the damage, I think it would be fine. If it said every time a zombie hits a player, they mill 1, and then had that second part of the text, once again, I think it would be very, very good. I don't know. I think it's too much. This might be the hardest darling to kill, but I think it's too much, and I think in terms of your game plan, you're going to sometimes have this in hand and not want to cast it because it'll stop you from killing your opponents, right? Because because hitting for 100 a hit is a lot harder than hitting for 40, right? You're basically having your damage, especially if you're attacking an opponent with no, with high deck, like they have a big deck and they have low health, right? So definitely, I think this is a cut. Undead War Chief is fine. The 2 is much better for a Lord. I think that's fine with it. And the reducing the cast works immediately. Will Pelt's great. Wonder is fine. God Eternal Bontu is very, very strong. Gary is fantastic. And finally, the last one I really want to talk about is Grin. I love Grin. This was one of my first mythics when I started playing. I think this was one of my first commander decks. Absolute bomb of a creature. Grin is not good enough anymore. I am so sorry. I wish it wasn't the case. I recognize that we need to recognize that his greatest ability is this one. This one right here. Sacrifice another creature, untap this, tap Grin, and put a +1/+1 counter on it. The fact that this allows you to sacrifice creatures at instant speed, with no other cost, is the best thing it does. And so it works really well with things like Undead Augur, or a bunch of other like card draw that we have access to, or things that care as zombies die. that's kind of overpaying for this ability, right? The destroy target creature defending player controls is almost a liability because honestly, I want to destroy any creature. I don't want to have to attack that player. I want to attack one player and destroy another player's creature a lot of the time. So it feels, you know, this is a slow, hulking creature that grows. I think if this card was printed today, it would have indestructibility. Like that's the kind of creature it is. It's almost like a Zergo, like a slow growing kind of creature that can't be stopped. And though that flavor is really cool, in this deck and where this deck is going, it's glacial. It's so slow. Yeah, not I'm gonna say not a big fan. So I would cut Grin. Coming to the end, the last thing that I generally want to cut. I'm just seeing if there's anything else I want to talk about. Yeah, let's just briefly talk about Lazotep Plating and Sudden Death and Disallow. These are just 3 cards that I think are just kind of overcosted for their abilities. Lazotep Plating should be a 1 mana card. There's quite a few 1 mana give something hexproof. I do recognize that this is permanence, but it's very rare that you want to, like, this isn't heroic intervention. It doesn't give indestructibility. It's very rare that you want to give multiple things hexproof in Commander. Commander is a format where you want to, how do I put this? You want to protect one thing at a time because your opponents tend to target one thing at a time. And if they can target like multiple things, this doesn't stop it. So what I'm saying is, for example, like if they have an infinite combo, or if they have like Goblin Bombardment and 30 tokens, you know, Lazotep Plating will not stop that because they'll just react to the plating and continue to target multiple things, right? So like there is this kind of like, if they're about to have the infinite combo and you Lazotep Plating yourself so you're protected from it, 90% of the time it won't change the fact that once the turn is over that they'll just then target you after, right? So this ability on 2 mana with the added bonus of creating a zombie army feels particularly weak. I would just like something at 1 mana. And I know sometimes it feels like I'm really nitpicking, like, but Cursed, going from 2 to 1 mana, is it really that big of a thing? I don't know why I put on that voice, but here's the thing. That's double the mana. That's double the mana. I have such a hard time making it any simpler than that. Play something that is half the mana of Lazotep Plating. It'll just go a little smoother. That being said, not the worst one out of these. I think it's fine if you keep it. But Disallow and Sudden Death are both overcosted. You can make this into, if you're not playing it already, Arcane Denial really easily. Or you can make this into any of the 1 mana counter spells. Dispel works great here because you're generally protecting your own stuff. You could also use an Offer You Can't Refuse, Swan Song. And on the other side, Sudden Death could be Fatal Push. It could be Tragic Slip in your deck that has a... No, you're not playing it. In your deck that has so many targets to sacrifice or to die to guarantee that -13. It could be Rapid Hybridization. It could be Pongify. And the reason I'm using these specific comparisons is that Disallow and Sudden Death are 3 times the mana of these comparisons. If you heard my silly voice and explanation 10 seconds ago, then you know 3 times the mana is way too much you're paying for this. I also think Sudden Death split second isn't very relevant. I could be wrong, but most of the time, I'm not too worried of your opponent interacting. Especially when it's not even destroy, it's -4/-4. If it was destroy target creature split second, I would be probably a little more on board. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about before we go into additions, as I've been going on for a while, as I intend to do, is these specific cards here. Maddening Cacophony and Fractured Sanity. Now, there might be... Undead Alchemist works a little bit like this. And I think that's generally it. So these cards are very clearly here for how they work with our commander. Now, especially Maddening Cacophony, actually both of them are just really good cards to mill. They mill quite a bit from our opponents, especially Fracture Sanity when you're not cycling it. So I want to be specific. I recognize that these cards are good to play, but the question that was asked for me was help making the deck functional without our commander. Without our commander, these cards do nothing for us. Very specifically nothing, because both of them only hit our opponents. If we were playing a mill card, a mass mill card that hit us as well, then I wouldn't find it that much of a problem, because a lot of our deck does function and like enjoy the fact that it can mill itself. So the fact that both of these cards specifically do not hit us is at the point that I'm not the biggest fan, I think. I think you'd be better off maybe playing something else that mills yourself too. I'm trying to think of a good example. Ashiok, the hybrid mana Ashiok comes to mind, but that doesn't mill your opponents, it just mills one player. I think maybe it's better just to keep these as is, maybe cut one of them, keep Fractured Sanity, but I think they just don't do enough. I don't know, I'm kind of 50-50 on them because I do recognize how powerful they are with your commander, and they are like a nice value play the turn before you have like 9 mana, slam Scarab God and steal something. It's close. I'm going to leave this up to Corey to decide. The last ones I want to point at is Endless Ranks of the Dead and Rooftop Storm. And I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to say I get that these are very, very fun cards, but there is a point that they are too weak for the deck. And I know Endless Ranks of the Dead is much more straightforward. It is on your upkeep. You create you can create X amount of black zombie tokens, and it's slow. Oh my goodness, it's slow, but it's really, really fun. I have a foil version of this card that I absolutely cherish, but it's slow. So you can keep it for the flavor. It's great. Just remember that. Rooftop Storm, I'll probably get a little more pushback on because I do recognize that it's almost an omniscience. And in a deck that wants to get to like 9 mana anyways, it's not ridiculous. I wish it worked with the Scarab God. It does not. This is just the kind of card I don't tend to love. So I'm just pointing it out. I think you should keep it, but I'm pointing out that I don't love it. All right, let's go into additions. We've gone long enough. My first addition, albeit a little boring, is Undercity Sewers. These new Surveil Lands are incredibly powerful, and I think they're absolutely worth running in Commander, but this one specifically, and obviously, works very, very well with our Commander. Unfortunately, the prices of these cards aren't ideal, so if you can trade for them or slowly amass them, you know, it is keeping the prices of Murder of Karlov Manor as a set high, which is, or like the sealed product high, which is not ideal, but as people open them, you know, eventually they will drop in price, or maybe just keep going up. It's hard to tell. I will say, perhaps this is another Shocklands scenario. I don't want to give financial advice. I really hate this part of our community, but something that's worth considering is look at the Triomes, look at the Shocklands, look at the prices and the habits of those prices, because the habits, I guess maybe the like the trajectory, because something that's worth considering is the Surveil Lands, much like Shocklands, much like Triomes, see play in every single set, every single format that they're legal in, outside of, I don't know what Legacy is like these days or Vintage, but Commander, Modern, Standard, Pioneer all play these. And look at how the prices go. Because if I looked back at this 6 to 10 months from now and they were $20 each, I don't think I would be too surprised. So keep that in mind if you're going to pick up cards for your Commander decks. You know, I was fortunate a while back to open a box of what was it? The New Capenna when I got it as prizing, and those Triomes have lasted me very, very, very long. And after my weekend tournament that I was at, I was even more fortunate to have I got more boxes of Karlov as prizing, so I'm hoping the same to open more of these. And if you can trade into these, I absolutely would. But that's the game. That's how Magic is. So, talking about some zombies we should be playing, Carrion Feeder is something that's very much so missing here. Remember what I was talking about Grin and how the ability I valued the most on Grin was its ability to sacrifice creatures? Carrion Feeder does that for 1 mana. This is an essential, this and Gravecrawler to me are the essential zombies. They really work together to not only enables so many combos, do a lot of different things, but also just generally protect you from exile removal for cards you might want to reanimate, allow you to leverage removal and grow Carrion Feeder, do combos, and get some attacks in that just may not be expected. Especially with tokens, Carrion Feeder gets really, really good. I'm a big fan. I think this should absolutely work in any version of the deck, and I think there's a lot you can gain from it. A creature that I kind of want you to play is Fleshbag Marauder. Something I talk about when it comes to sack outlets, or not sack outlets, but sacrifice effects, so the Fleshbag Marauder cycle, like the Playcrafter cycle, is that they get better in multiples. The longer you keep pressuring your opponent's board states, the more powerful this kind of effect gets. However, if we are reducing the power of this effect, generally, let's say, by not running a lot of these cards or almost any, I think that like lack in power is made up for the fact that we do have a Kindred, typing that's important to us. So with that in mind, I think this is free to kind of play. Like I said before, when I'm powering up a deck, I'm looking for things that like impact the board immediately. And Fleshbag Marauder not only is a pretty clean 3-for-1, it also does snipe commanders. This is the kind of card that if I have it in my opening hand, I'm very much playing the first 4-ish turns around it, trying to make sure I'm setting up a situation or I'm playing into a situation where I'm trying to get 1 or 2 commanders off the battlefield for this creature. It is very often, I find, that people play decks that will, like the classic commander idea of playing mana ramp turn 2, then your commander turn 3 kind of thing, and Fleshbag Marauder absolutely punishes those decks basically for free, right? Something just to consider, and I think it's pretty, like the upside is very, very high. Another zombie that I think is very much so missing here that I really, really like is the Archghoul of Thraben. When your zombies die, including it, you basically get a Surveil trigger. However, if the top card is a zombie, you can put it into your hand. So I think I would play a creature that's creatures that say whenever a creature dies, Surveil 1 are basically playable in these kind of decks, but this is just better than that. And I think that's really, really impressive. I think the fact that it's an uncommon, it's a 3/2, I think people are looking like past how good this can be. Not even saying before things like the Gravecrawler and Carrion Feeder combo, just general combat, just general interaction will trigger this, I think, a lot of times easily to let you dig through a lot of your deck. The fact that it's one of those, because green sometimes has these abilities where you get to put it into your hand or else you leave it on top. The fact that you can toss it into your graveyard, so if there's, for example, lands you don't need anymore, this is a really, really good ability. I really, really do like this, and I think this is probably, one of the more impactful cards that I'm suggesting. Something else that kind of is a grown-up version of Fleshbag Marauder is Ravenous Rot Belly. This is why I said I didn't say the only one you'd play, because I think this is the second one you play. When this enters the battlefield, you sacrifice up to 3 zombies, and then each opponent sacrifices that many creatures. And this is just really, really, really good, I think. This is a 5 mana repeated 3, you get to gauge how many 3-for-1s you do. Unlike old black cards that don't take it easy on you, this isn't sacrifice 3 zombies, which I think it should have been, honestly, because that feels more on flavor. But you get to decide what you dial this card to, which is insane to me. And if you are on a board where people have just 2 creatures at least, you will absolutely sacrifice a bunch of tokens to wipe their boards, basically. This card is so, so good. The only downside is the fact that it's just a 4/5, and because of that, there's going to be a situation where you're going to sacrifice this to itself. But I think that's kind of a feature and not a bug. One more zombie that I think is very, very good and absolutely worth playing is Sadisi Undead Vizier. I love her. She is one of my favorite characters. What a fantastic character. I hope her evil plans bear fruit. She is fantastic. Just a tutor that you have access to that can just sacrifice herself to tutor immediately or sacrifice something else. Do note there is this interaction point where if you are sacrificing something else, your opponent can remove Sadisi in response, and therefore this trigger never occurs. But if Sadisi sacrifices herself, they do not have, or like they do. I'm sorry, this is always such a hard thing. It's been explained to me so many times. If you get the exploit off and she exploits herself, you're guaranteed the card. But if you put the... Okay, you know what? I'm just going to let it go. Sadisi, usually you can sacrifice herself, or you can sacrifice a 2/2. A tutor that is on Kindred, typal, is really great, and a 4/6 Death Touch is fantastic. If the creature with exploit isn't on the battlefield as the exploit ability resolves, you won't get the bonus from the creature with exploit, even if you sacrifice a creature. But you can sacrifice itself. Right? You can sacrifice the creature with exploit if it's still on the battlefield. This will cause the other ability to trigger. There you go. That's it. Let's move on. I never want to talk about exploit again. A few other cards that I think can benefit the deck that I think are just accessible right now. Lively Durge is an incredibly cool card. It does everything that you want, both sides of it. And much like your commander, how I see it, you can just wait to get this to the total of 5 mana to get all effects of this card. I would suggest that if you ever cast this for 3, you should grab Gravecrawler, because it is probably the best tutor target you have into your graveyard. But if you do it for the full thing, you have a lot of options of what you can do, and I do really, really like that. Total mana 4 or less lets you set up some interesting 2/2s or 1 and a 3, but generally if you're getting a 1 mana creature, it's going to be the Gravecrawler, and you don't need to reanimate that. Essence Flux is something that I think I really like as both a protection piece and an enabler for certain cards. Much as I just want to point to Sadisi or Ravenous Rot Belly and say, hey, if you flicker this, you get another trigger. That's very much the ceiling of this card. I will say that I think the floor of this card is you're going to blink your commander to prevent removal, and I think that's pretty good. We just ignore the spirit side to it, despite that one zombie spirit we have, and I think it's just generally good. It is a card that's always about $1 because this ability is so rare in blue at 1 mana, but I think it's worth picking up, and I think it allows you to have some interesting plays. Finally, I want to get to something that I've kind of talked about, but I haven't exactly explained. Your commander, and kind of how it works, relies on putting your opponent's cards into their graveyards. For that reason, you are playing specifically Maddening Cacophony and Fraying Sanity. I do believe Mesmeric Orb. I could be wrong. Let's double check. Yep, Mesmeric Orb. Now, these cards are good. And, sorry, I forgot to mention the 4 mana Undead Alchemist. So these cards are good. They do mill a lot. But, for me, they're not the ideal way to get rid of our opponent's cards. So what I want to do is I want to use Discard, and I want to use the Oppression package, which is one I really like, and I'll go through all 3 cards, to pressure our opponent's hands and simultaneously get rid of some of their creatures. Now, these will not reach as deep as like Fraying Sanity might, because getting 14 triggers off of Oppression on one opponent, I don't think it's going to happen, especially when they're hellbent. But on the other hand, the sheer pressure you get to put on your opponent's hands with cards like this is, I believe, very much so worth it. So the Oppression package is Oppression, Bottomless Pit, and Painful Quandary. Now, if you were going to play the last one, I don't think I would be too, I don't think that's a problem. The first 2 are good enough. Bottomless Pit and Oppression will work really well together in different boards. Bottomless Pit is just a lot of pressure. Don't forget, both of these cards hit you too, but you are generally okay with discarding your cards due to how the deck works. Bottomless Pit, you just don't have any control, which can be good against your opponents, and Oppression is just generally very, very good, especially against Spellslinger decks or anyone trying to go infinite or do something spicy. Something that's worth simplifying is that both of these cards, for players who might feel like, yeah, but it says player, not opponent, is that you're generally getting triple the triggers. Like, you're guaranteed triple the triggers on Bottomless Pit, but Oppression, you're generally also guaranteed most of the time triple triggers, because you have 3 opponents that are triggering this, whereas, they are losing more than you are. But it is a cost, and I do recognize that. Painful Quandary is obviously the big brother of these cards, but it only affects your opponents. It has a very big life drain that really does matter in the late game, and just puts a ton of pressure on your opponents. However, it is a 5-mana card that is not on theme, so it is a bit trickier to fit in. I still think the ceiling of this card is rather high, and I think you're going to have a good time playing it. And as I see, it's now at 40 minutes. That's all I'm going to say. I had a lot to say about this deck, which I do appreciate. And a lot of it was, I mean, some of it was side stuff, but I do think, like, I really appreciate the question of, like, how to kill the darlings and how to look at these things, and how to look at a deck when we somewhat split our commander off from it. Thank you so much, Corey, for sending the deck. I had a blast, and I hope this video was helpful to you. Happy deck building, and good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.